Hey everyone, it's Jim
And Charles.
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube store. And today, in Tube Lab number 241, we're going to talk again about sound shaping. And the summer sale 2025 still has a weekend to go. And last weekend, we set a record in the business. We've never shipped so many orders.
And we were still shipping them by Tuesday.
Yeah, well, we had about 90% of them out on Monday.
Yep.
That's always been a focus of our business, is to ship quickly. We've got a huge number of excellent, high-demand, quality. Have I got any more superlatives?
Vintage
vacuum tubes
that have come in over the last week, and when we weren't shipping, we were testing and clearing and matching. So we've got a bunch to show off to you at the end of the episode.
Yeah, we really hustled to get them into the store so you can still snatch them with the summer discount. So yeah, so stay till the end. We've got one of the best vintage KT88s ever made in quantity. Well, actually, somebody already bought one of the quads.
Slightly less quantity now.
Slightly less quantity. And we also have one of the best vintage 12AX7s ever made back in quantity as well. Anyways, first, caution everyone. Electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult the professional technician when in doubt. Well, almost every audio equipment manufacturer in history has tried to create a box that will improve a flat-sounding recording and or audio system. Companies like DBX built a business around this idea, but many others, including even Bob Carver, got in on the act. And for good reason. So many records and digital files sound flat and lifeless. So for years now, I've been thinking about what we could come up with that would be fresh and good sounding, without any of the issues from the past, including noticeable distortion. And then we did it, without even trying. All it took was inserting our new modern line 6 or 12 SN7 preamp into our system, and presto, everything sounded better. I'll show you how it works and how you can accomplish the same thing in your own system. Okay, so what we got here is a very simple digital-based system. So you got a bunch of ones and zeros going into your DAC. Your DAC has got a critical stage that a lot of people don't even know exists, and it's got a gain stage. And that gain stage may well be more important than how the DAC actually brings the ones and zeros over to
An analog signal.
Yeah. So this is a very typical transistor. It's a low noise, sort of middle of the road, high quality transistor. They're the smallest little things you've ever seen. I actually have a card of them here just so you could have a look at them. A lot of these are actually now on chips, so they're even smaller. In fact, they're almost microscopic. I guess they are microscopic. And, of course, the race is to see how many transistors you can put on a chip. But when you compare a transistor to a vacuum tube, it's not hard. Actually, yeah, you see I'm using a vacuum tube that out of the scrap pile. So this poor guy has a short. But it's not hard to see why the electronics industry went 110% in the direction of solid-state devices. Yeah. Just the size, the cost of construction. I mean, there's just no comparison. Sonically, though, that's a completely different story, and that's what we're talking about today. So, after your black box, your DAC, you're going to have some sort of a control preamp. And if you're lucky, you're running something like, I've got the wrong tube installed. Charles, how did we manage this? Okay, let's put in a 6SN7 or a 12SN7. So we've got a very typical voltage gain stage, a medium U tube, and we've got higher gain coming out and high impedance, and we're going to have, hopefully, you're going to have a cathode follower stage. And I love the 6N6P and the CF stage. We're designing exclusively with it now as a cathode follower. It just does that amazingly well. It does a lot of things well. It's one of our favorite tubes. Signal comes in. You might have noticed that it's not coming off of the plate, it comes off the cathode. So now we have unity gain. So essentially whatever voltage came in goes out. The reality is it's slightly lower. And unity just means essentially zero. In and out are essentially equal to each other, right? But we've got a low impedance signal coming out now, so we can drive, let's say, a pair of monoblocks. So that's if the components are well chosen and the designer knew what they were doing with your black box, this could sound very good. Now, what if your DAC has a tube gain stage like a 6N1P? Well, all of a sudden, that very neutral sounding transistor is going to have a little bit of something special. The 6N1P is a very unique sounding tube, and it's very subtle, but it probably will improve this DAC stage substantially. And this is actually very common among DIYers, and it's probably working its way up into the commercial DACs that are coming out. Now, this is all well and good, and this can sound quite good. But will it bring a system alive? Maybe. But let me show you what we did in our system. So I'm going to change it up, and I'll see you back in just a second. Okay, so for years, this has been basically the configuration in our system. So we're big vinyl guys, and it's not because of nostalgia, though it is nice to have a nice big album cover to look at with art on the front and a write-up on the back. But we're big vinyl fans for the sound. There's no digital file I've ever listened to that comes close to the warmth and the live-like sound of vinyl.
Of well-recorded and mastered vinyl.
That's right. Like CDs and digital files, 99% of all the records ever pressed sound like caca. And digital is no different. And a lot of remasterings of CDs and those files that later became streaming files, they're caca too. So there's just no way to get out from underneath that fact. So, and that's mostly not the artist's fault. That is the record company's fault. They really just don't give a you-know-what. So our job as music lovers is to carefully choose our source. So, and we have vinyl and digital. We have a lot of both, partly because we do a lot of critical listening and partly because we're music lovers. So having a big music library at our fingertips is just really good. In fact, it's a great joy. So if you're on vinyl, you're going to need a lot of gain because the signal coming off of a stylus is extremely low. In our case, we have a phono preamp that's running 2 gain stages of the 6 or the 12 SL7. So we have 1 gain stage. In between, we actually have the equalization that takes the RIAA and brings it back to flat, essentially. And then we have a second gain stage. Now, the 6 or the 12 SL7 tube is a very warm sounding tube. And it's got this richness to it that it just makes the mid-range just sing. And we chose, we actually did a number of builds using different tubes for the phono development. And the 6SL just won hands down. So we've got a warm gain stage and a warm gain stage. What is that warmth we're talking about? That's the second harmonic. Now, if you were to go to a live concert hall, you would be hearing the fundamental, that's the sound directly off of the instruments or off the speakers in the room, and you'd be hearing a lot of reverb. Depending on the hall, it'll depend on the time delay of the reverb, how many harmonics of it. That's right. Reverb is essentially our harmonic or our very complex harmonic. Tubes are no different. So even though the dominant or fundamental is going to be the signal itself, way down underneath that is going to be a harmonic. And that's a distortion. There's no getting away from that fact. But it's the good distortion that tube lovers really enjoy. So the second harmonic in a vacuum tube, or let me say that differently. The first harmonic you're going to hear in a vacuum tube is almost always going to be the second harmonic. Now, the interesting thing is in solid state gain stages, it's often the third harmonic. Now, why is this important? Well, the second harmonic is that dominant harmonic that we're going to hear as reverb in a concert hall. It's what I think our brains have become accustomed to. It is considered to be a beneficial harmonic.
A pleasing one, often described as warm or filling in the sound.
So the even harmonics, the second and the fourth, those are both even, are considered to be beneficial harmonics. The third and the fifth are considered to be not beneficial or not good sounding. Now, the good news is if you're in a hall, you're going to hear a lot of second harmonic and less of the third and much less of the fourth. The harmonics drop off. They go down really quickly. So that's why the second is really what we hear a lot of. When we are voicing preamps and tube amplifiers, we sweep it so we get a full spectrum analysis, and we really look to see where the second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth. We see all the way down to what, the ninth, 10th harmonic?
And I don't know if you mentioned it, but the reason why we're talking about the third and solid state is because it tends to generate more of the third harmonics, while tubes tend to generate more of the second.
Yes. So let's get rid of that. Now, that second harmonic that we're talking about, even in a very warm sounding tube like the 6SL7, is very low. It's just going to be in a
just above the noise floor.
Yeah, in a well-designed preamp or gain stage, it's going to be just above the noise floor. That's how low down it is. But it makes a difference. And here's the interesting thing. We add gain at this stage, we add a little bit of harmonics, a very small amount. We amplify this amplified stage, right? So the signal continues to increase its gain, and we actually apply gain to the previous stage's fundamental, the signal, as well as the harmonic that we generated in this tube. So now we have much more signal.
And that brings up those harmonics just a little bit more.
Now, we've got high impedance, high gain coming off of here, so we have a cathode follower stage. Does the cathode follower add harmonics? Probably not, because it's basically got unity gain. So what comes in goes out. So if we put a volt RMS in off of our phono preamp stage, we'll get a volt out. It'll be a little less than a volt, but it'll be close. But we're probably not doing very much with the harmonics. And in fact, a good cathode follower stage, we really want to be very low distortion as well as low impedance. Now, in our system, we have, for years, we've been running various single stage control preamps, and we often are running the 612SN7 as the universal type, and we'll be running just one voltage gain stage. We'll add a little bit of harmonics. 6SN7 is a nice warm tube, and again, we'll have a cathode follower stage so we can easily drive the power stage. Now, what did we do with the redevelopment of the modern line universal 612SN7 preamp? Well, we added a gain stage. And of course, we added another 6SN or 12SN7 gain stage. And wow, what a difference. It brought, we listened to a fair amount of jazz from the 1950s into the 1960s. A lot of those recordings are older. Even the remastered versions of them, the tapes were getting older. And they always, I wouldn't say always, but often have a lack of a liveliness to the recording. And a lot of pop and rock records sound as flat as can be, even recorded in the 70s during the heyday of multi-tracking. In fact, I would argue multi-tracking is the devil. But anyways, so this simply added more warmth. And I can remember the first time I heard this, I was actually cooking dinner in the kitchen, and I thought, wow, that sounds good. Mm-hmm. And Charles was playing a record for our dinner concert, and I thought, I have to go in and look at it and like, listen to this, see what the heck's going on. And of course, I abandoned the cooking dinner, and yeah, it sounded amazing. I thought, okay. So we're eating dinner, and I said to Charles, probably the dumbest thing I've said in months, I said, why did the system sound so much better with that record? It was a recording that we're really well familiar with. Mm-hmm. And Charles said,
well, we've added another warm gain stage.
Yeah, that's all it took. Now, could we go over the top if we added a third stage? I think we're actually, in our own system, we're pushing the limits.
Yeah, and if we brought in a very good warm-sounding source to begin with, we might actually be over that.
Yeah. Now, what about tailoring this? Well, what if you were running 12AU7s instead of 6SN7s? The 12AU7s typically is electrically almost identical to the 6SN7. The tubes are different. You can't just plug one into the other. But electrically, they're very, very similar. They're both medium U twin triodes, and you can actually reuse the circuit. A 6SN7 circuit will run a 12AU7, and a 12AU7 circuit will run a 6SN7. If we had a pair of 12AU7s in the control preamp, that warmth would drop off dramatically, because this is a very neutral sounding tube, even the very best of them. The very best 12AU7s might have a little nicer sparkle up in the top end in the treble, but as a whole, particularly in the mid-range, this is a very neutral sounding tube. So our very live sounding system would start to go more towards neutral, towards solid state.
Now, it would still be amplifying the warmth that would be getting added in through these 6 or 12 SL7s here.
I'm glad you brought that up. What if you're running what is very typically used in a tube phono preamp, a 12AX7 or a pair of 12AX7s? Well, it would get even more neutral, because there's a huge difference between the 6SL7 and the 12AX7 as far as mid-range warmth is concerned. This is a very neutral sounding tube. The better vintage versions, and we're actually going to talk about one of the best sounding vintage versions of the 12AX7 at the end of the show, help. They can help a lot. But as a whole, this is a much more neutral sounding tube than the 6SL7. So what are we saying here? Well, choose your gain stages very carefully. Even way back here at the DAC stage, if you're running an all-digital system, that gain stage right here, that
is going to get amplified. Whatever it does to it is going to get amplified across your whole signal chain.
Yeah. And going with what a lot of DIYers are doing and putting something like a 6N1P into and getting rid of the solid state gain stage and going to a tube gain stage can really bring your digital source alive, and just make a huge difference in your system. So what's the moral of the story? Choose the tubes that you're going to use in your system very, very carefully, because you're going to have to live with that for however many years are in your system. And within a tube type, for example, a 12AX7 or 12AU7 or a 6SL7 or a 6SN7, there are huge differences between manufacturers. So, for example, a modern 6SN7 might be edgy in the mid-range and almost harsh in the treble. The better vintage 6SN7s have none of those issues at all. In fact, whatever is going on with modern production of vacuum tubes that's bringing some harshness to it, that's not something that was ever part of vintage manufacturing. And we've listened to hundreds and hundreds of different types of vintage tubes, and we just don't hear that harshness.
Yeah, but you can pick it up right away with a modern production.
Yeah, so I don't know what's missing or what they're doing differently, but yeah, so be really careful about that. Okay, now Charles is saying there are a lot of really good tubes we want to get to take a look at. And let's clear the decks and we'll be right back. Okay, so up first is a fresh platinum set for the Freya. We sell in any year hundreds and hundreds of match sets for the Freya. One of the highest demand sets is the platinum set, which is always the best Sylvania GE set we can put together, or tongue saw set. The tongue 6SN7 is basically extinct, and it's getting really hard to even find the Sylvanias. But we found enough new old stock Sylvanias and GEs that we've got a couple of sets in for the Freya. You might notice the Sylvanias have red labels. That just means that they were sold as commercial tubes. So to a repair shop or to a manufacturer, it just means that they fall under the commercial warranty that Sylvania set up. GE did the same thing as well. So there was no cash refund. If you had a defective tube in the shop or on the job, you just brought it back and you got an exchange. That's why they wanted to label them. Now,
so we've gotten in some new old stock Sylvanias and some good used ones that are very excellent. They're probably actually quite close to new old stock, but we're selling them as used. But we've also gotten in some fantastic new old stock GE tubes. And these are excellent sounding as voltage gain. They're excellent sounding as cathode followers. And we've been able to find one of the rarer versions of them. Take a look at that. That is the top filament bridge.
Is that the sucker that glows?
Yeah, it has a beautiful glow right across here, and I don't know where these were made exactly. Maybe it was just one factory line that was making them. They're quite rare, but we were actually able to make up some pairs of these, along with the regular GEs that don't have that bridge as new old stock. And so we've got sets with these in them.
Yeah. Now, the way it's going to work for the GEs, because everybody loves the filament bridge, is we only have a few of them, and the first it's first come, first served. So if you order a Freya set and we've got some filament bridges, we'll send them. If we don't, we'll send the regular new old stock GE. Is there a difference sonically in the GEs?
No.
We've never.
They just look neat.
They just look neat. They're cool. It's a cool factor. And we don't put them in the store as a separate listing. They're all under the same product number. So yeah, so there's a couple of sets for the Freya, and they'll probably sell right away. So because we've been struggling to get enough high quality tubes in for the platinum sets for the Freya. There are some less expensive sets that sound great for the Freya. So if you're looking for a deal,
some good vintage tubes on a budget to replace the stock new production ones, then we've got those too.
Yeah. Okay, what's the next, Charles? Well, we were just talking about the 6SL7 tube, and it just so happens, Charles, you found a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, so we've gotten in some more of these beautiful WGT types. These are the later Sylvania Philips production tubes, and we have ones with these beautiful brown micanol bases. They're less common, and the standard black bases here.
In fact, that's got the blue label on it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that's going to have a Philips name on it.
So this is fairly late production here. I think we actually have a date code of 1986 on it.
Yeah, and the plant was closed by then. So the date code, so Philips bought Sylvania USA, so Dutch Philips bought Sylvania USA about 1980-81, somewhere around there. And the initial tubes that came out were marked Philips Sylvania. And then later on, they went with the blue label and they just called them Philips tubes. But they are exactly the same Sylvania tubes. Philips bought Sylvania, I think, predominantly to get their hands on all the military contracts that Sylvania had. Sylvania supplied a lot of military tubes. So we don't have nearly as many of the brown bases. And there's two different listings. You'll see them, two versions of our inventory number 280.
And they're both excellent sounding 6SL7 types. They're both very high testing, so they have much higher gain than a standard 6SL7, which is great for use in a phono preamp.
And interestingly, they have lower noise.
Yep.
So
yeah, they're very low noise. Probably something to do with this particular plate structure, which is fairly unique to the Sylvania 6SL7s.
yeah, it's not just a military tube with the slap Jan label on it. These were actually built specifically for really high endurance applications, such as high altitude, high vibration, high Gs. So yeah, it's a very specialized tube.
And they all tend to test very well. And I can't remember the last one that we had come through that was actually noisy or microphonic, which is really saying something for a high gain tube.
And early in this episode, we were talking about sound shaping. So if you were running, and Charles is going to talk about these in just a minute, but if you were running an earlier 6SL7, particularly a Sylvania, there's nothing like a Sylvania 6SL7 for sonics, and your system was just a little bit warmer than you like, you could easily put in the WGT version. You get a little tiny bit more gain, a little less noise, and you would go slightly towards the neutral. And you might really love these tubes because when you remove some of that harmonic distortion, you can hear more of the detail.
If you have too much, it can make it sound muddy.
Yeah. So, and
over here, these are getting so rare now in the 6-volt version that I was actually surprised we were able to make up a pair of used ones.
I actually had deleted the listings because I never thought we would actually carry them again. This is essentially the first octal version of the 6SL7 Sylvania made. They look a lot like a famous 6SN7 known as the Bad Boy.
Yeah, so we call them the Bad Boy version of the 6SL7s that Sylvania has.
Do we? Or did we just make that up?
I do. I refer to them that way.
Yeah.
They have these beautiful big chrome flashes here because they have a plate getter tucked down in the bottom. You won't be able to see it probably. Well, maybe. And they have these offset tall plates. They come in a black plate and a gray plate version. They both sound the same to my ears anyway, but we were actually able to get a set together of the used ones. We do have more of these in the 12-volt version, but the 6 volts are just incredibly difficult to find.
Yeah, and they are, if you like a warm, rich mid-range, they are the queen of warmth.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some older versions that we actually have that are rebased 7 F7s.
That are essentially the same structure in a shorter bottle with the plates kind of back to back with each other.
And the whole dome is chrome.
Yeah. Oh, it's a huge just flash on some of them you can't even see the plates on the inside.
Yeah, so it's hard to match the plate color. And honestly, we get questions every once in a while saying, gray plate or black plate. That's a coating that goes on the tube, and I honestly have never heard a difference between a gray and black plate coating. They're both essentially designed to do the same thing. Black coatings tend to be older, though that's not a hard and fast rule, and gray coatings tend to be newer. And again, that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's a good general way to date a tube.
Okay, well, we've got some more to look at, so let's clear the deck and we'll be right back. Okay,
now, not that long ago, Charles discovered a new tube, at least to us, and it's not commonly known in the vacuum tube community, though I'm sure some of you out there are nodding your head, yeah, I know what that is. And it's the 12R HH14.
Produced by NEC, set up by Western Electric. So this is a very close tube to a Western Electric tube that was similar, and it is a drop-in close replacement to a 12AX7. It's a lower gain version. I believe it's like the 5751 Avionics tube.
Yeah, so I think the gain is roughly 70 versus 100 for a 12AX7.
Mm-hmm.
But what you have to remember about gains is those are nominal maximum gains. So no designer ever designs a tube to run at its maximum gain. And
even if you did, you're probably not getting exactly that out.
Yeah, no. So by the time you lower what a typical 12AX7 would be set at, which would be about 70, you might find that the mu or gain of the 12R HH14, God, that's a mouthful. It took me months just to memorize that tube number. It may actually not be that much different. It will be lower, though, in the same circuit. But we've gotten reports from audiophile customers that this is one of the best sounding 12AX7s they've ever heard.
Yeah, and it's just a joy to listen to and clear them on our testing preamp. Compared to almost all the other 12AX7s out there, these are just lovely to listen to.
Now, you listen to them when you test them, don't you?
Yep. Yeah, I listen to every single one of them. I give them a shot with some of my my clearing tubes playlist. I have a little bit of fun with it, so it's a nice part of the job. and I check every one of them for noise, for microphonics, for popping sounds on startup, and anything that has anything like that, in the trash it goes.
Yeah.
And we just recently got in a decent number of these tubes, and we're able to make up some match pairs of both the double mica version that I was just showing you and the more rare triple mica. So this one has an extra mica spacer. That's typically done to help stiffen up the tube and make it more vibration resistant.
Yeah, and that's a really common question that we'll see coming in. So basically, the more mica structure you have, or the more structure to support the plates inside the vacuum glass envelope, the lower the noise, basically. And in fact, we're going to be looking at a triple mica tube in just a minute.
Yeah. So we've got in some new old stock match pairs of these guys. We've got in a fair number of them of both types.
Should we give a caution, though? The supply of these is really limited, and we probably in a week will be sold out. So if you're interested in getting into them, they're not cheap 12AX7s, but they're not incredibly expensive.
No, you're not buying a Telefunken here or something like that. And you've got a discount.
So grab them if you're interested. Now, I think we're moving up to something much bigger, aren't we?
Yep. Let's go see what we've got.
Okay, last but definitely not least, we were really lucky, and we found at no little cost a large supply of probably the best sounding KT8 ever made. That's the SED, or Spetana Electronic Devices KT88, and they're all good used, but they are, I would say, very low hour tubes. Now we're going to sell them all as good used, and if you pay attention, there's actually a possibility to get a really inexpensive quad. Now, we've got to be really careful with these tubes. There are a lot, any great sounding vintage tube, particularly the Svetlanas, but also the Mullards and the Telefunkens, there are a lot of fakes and reissues and copies. None of them are the same tube. So the first thing you want to look for is rectangular plate openings. And over on the side here, look at how the tube is welded together or spot tacked together, how the plate sections go together. Those are dead giveaways. The label is nice to see. There's the stylized S, and Svetlana used a number of different labels. This is the true Svetlana from St. Petersburg that we're talking about. And they have been really hard to keep in stock. We've got a number of customers that keep spare sets just to make sure, because these sound absolutely amazing. If you are into pop and rock, dynamic music, electronica, and you're running, let's say, a Wilsonton R8 that can take the KT88 or the L34, this is a great rock tube. It really is. In fact, we sold a quad recently to a customer that's trying to bring his R8 up to the best it can be. Now, the R8 is a great, affordable, high-powered Class A/B amp, and like any amplifier that uses 9 tubes, that's right, it uses 9 tubes. You got the difference between an inexpensive set of tubes like the stock Chinese tubes and a quality vintage set. It's like night and day. When I first plugged in my R8 years ago and listened to the stock tubes, I thought I had made a mistake buying the amp. It sounded so bad. But then when I changed out the tubes to vintage, it just came alive, and really, it makes a huge difference. So we still have a number of good used quads that are close matched in the store. We have matched spares available. So it really makes sense, and I can't emphasize this enough. If you want your power tube quad or pair or whatever you're running in your system to last a long time, having a matched spare is absolutely critical, because you will lose a power tube now and then. It's just power tubes don't last anywhere near as long as preamp tubes. So maybe you get a couple of good years out of the set, depending on the number of hours you're running, the amp, how hot the tubes are running.
And then if one tube fails, then you have 3 that are basically useless.
Yeah, but if you have a matched spare, you plug in your replacement, and maybe you get a couple more years out of that set. So, and again, that's going to depend on your hours, on your system. A lot of it depends on how stable your electricity is, how carefully the gain stage, or the biasing of the output tubes was done. So if it's a jacked up instrument amp, it might be running at 90 or 100% of its duty rating, or its maximum ratings, in which case your power tubes don't last long. If it was designed properly, it'd be running at 60 or 70% of maximum, and those tubes will last a long time. So that can make a huge difference how they're biased. Now, we've got one quad that's testing a little bit lower at the low end of good used. It's still excellent. It's still showing full chrome. That's with power tubes, look at your chrome. If your chrome is really solid and full, and it's not, you can see there's a small amount of recession here, and this tube dates back to the year 2000, so it's now 25 years old. And it's probably got a few hours of use, but if you look at it, it looks basically new old stock. But our testing number tells us that it's got at least a few hours on it, most likely. So there is a quad that's heavily discounted that you can grab, and you can use the summer code and get a second discount. And there's a single for that actual discount quad. You'll see it in the store. There's just one of them, so you can actually get your spare at a discount as well.
Yeah.
So people ask us, I don't have the money right now for a quad of the KT88s. I really wanted them. Can you hold a pair? Can you let me know when you get another quad in? We never know. These are getting so rare and difficult to find. Finding as many as we did. In fact, we found the largest lot we ever have found.
Mm-hmm. And we had to fight for them.
Yeah. Well, that's another story. So that's for my memoir. Suffice to say that we didn't hurt anybody.
No.
Too much.
No.
Anyways, if you stayed to the very end, here's some
here's a discount code.
Here's
for you.
the discount code to use.
And you can still use the Cheers codes if you want.
Yeah. Now, you can't use them in combination. You can use one code. That's how the store is set up. And here's a heads up. We always have late arrivals at the end of our big summer sale. And it always happens on Monday morning. I really wanted to buy a whole bunch of stuff, and I kept trying to get to it, or I didn't have the cash. Can you extend the sale? Well, I gave up on setting the date for Sunday. I always extend it to Monday. So here's the heads up. If you're a little late and you make your order on Monday, yeah, you can still use the summer 2025 code. So
that's it. We're not going to Tuesday.
No. Actually, Tuesday we put the lawn chairs out on the lawn and we take a break, because this is a lot of work running the sale. Stay safe, everyone. This is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Cheers, everyone.